So on my desktop computer at home, I have 2 sticky notes with handwritten messages attached to the monitor. The first one is a quote from a minor character in the Harry Potter novels, Sir Cadogan, a knight of the Round Table whose portrait lives in the divination corridor. He says to Harry, Ron, and Hermione, quote, "Be of stout heart, the worst is yet to come." Unfortunately, he's hit the nail on the head when it comes to 2020 so far. The other quote is from Brian Stevenson, the founder of the Equal Justice Initiative and the Ware Lecturer at the Unitarian Universalist Association's 2017 General Assembly. His advice to us in that address was to, quote, "get proximate." He said that those of us who would seek a more just, equitable, and compassionate world must find ways to work closer to the marginalized folks who suffer most from our nation's policies and practices. This morning, I'd like to tell you about some of the stories I've heard in my attempts to get proximate to our immigrant neighbors here in Georgia, whose statuses range from undocumented to deferred action for childhood arrival or DACA, temporary protected status holders, and naturalized citizens. I became involved with immigrants' rights activism 3 years ago when I got arrested protesting at a Georgia Board of Regents meeting in solidarity with undocumented students. As part of that action, I learned that Regents policies 416 and 434 effectively ban DACA recipients and undocumented students from being able to attend public universities in Georgia. That we have policies that are effectively modern segregation in our state. I learned that some of our most talented and ambitious young people are working in construction and fast food because there's no path to higher education available to them. After that Board of Regents protest, I led a service here at UUCA alongside Rafael Aragon, a DACA recipient and immigration justice activist in Atlanta. Rafael is a former student and current staff member at Freedom University, a freedom school for undocumented and DACA youth, and some of the money from that day's giveaway the plate went to helping pay the DACA renewal fee for him and other DACA recipients at the school. I want folks to know that your contributions to this work are having real and relevant impacts on the lives of some of our strongest young leaders. It's important in speaking about immigration that we hear not only the voices of those born with citizenship privilege, but from immigrant leaders themselves. The pre-quarantine plan was for an asylum seeker currently in sanctuary with NSMA to come in person and address the congregation this morning. Unfortunately, because of his pending immigration case, he cannot provide his testimonial over the internet. If he were speaking with you today, he would tell you that he is a gay man from Jamaica who emigrated to the United States because his family and church threatened his life when they found out he was gay. He suffered beatings and homelessness in Jamaica and was living in unsanitary and vulnerable conditions when he first made his way to the United States. Now, thanks to the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee and an interfaith coalition of congregations like this one, he is able to work on furthering his immigration case in relative safety. His case isn't settled yet, but there is, at least potentially, a happy ending in sight. For most of the immigrants and families that I have come in contact with this year, there won't be a happy ending. Last October marked the first month on record when there were 0 refugees resettled in the United States. The state of Georgia is both a part of that trend and is simultaneously doing everything it can to deport the immigrants who are already here. As I mentioned in the offering, local law enforcement in Georgia cooperates with ICE at higher rates than anywhere else in the country. Our immigration court judiciary denies bond in well over 90% of cases and sets the bond more than 50% higher than the national average in cases where bond is provided. The combination of these factors means that accusations that are trivial or even false can lead to imprisonment and deportation for our immigrant neighbors. I first witnessed this process up close last year when a colleague requested my help to accompany a family to immigration court in downtown Atlanta. The man in immigration detention was named Salvador, and he had been in jail for 8 months. His wife was struggling mightily to continue to provide for their children while he was imprisoned without bail. She cried throughout the brief appeal hearing and in the hallway afterwards as we prayed with her. Let me tell you why Salvador had been in prison for 8 months. He had been shopping at Walmart with his family and found a wallet lying on the ground that he returned to the customer service counter. And when the owner claimed it, they accused Salvador of having taken $200 from the wallet. The local police came to investigate, and when they found out that Salvador was an undocumented immigrant, they turned him over to ICE. Even at that point, he was held for 8 months without bond. Even at his hearing, he was not able to see his wife since he appeared via video conference, despite being held in immigration jail just a block from the courthouse downtown. The statistics were not in his favor, but I held out hope for Salvador. He had a pro bono attorney from Cook Baxter, the leading immigration law firm in Atlanta. There was evidence that police had mishandled his arrest, including witness accounts. Nevertheless, his bond was denied. Earlier this year, I had the opportunity to visit a man from Africa in prison at Stewart Detention Center in Lumpkin, Georgia, over 2 hours away from the Atlanta area. I was working in partnership with El Refugio, an organization that helps families visit immigrant detainees in that remote part of the state. This man told me he fled politically motivated death threats from soldiers with guns in his home country, but after months in U.S. immigration detention, he was now facing deportation to that same country. I attended a deportation hearing for a mentally ill woman born in Africa who had lived in the U.S. since the age of 2. Her mother was her caretaker and worked at a school cafeteria. The hearing ended in a deportation order being issued for the young woman, and the judge told her that unless she paid for her own flight back to Africa, she would be classified as an involuntary detainee and ineligible to return to the United States for a 10-year period for any reason. We're spending millions of dollars on imprisoning immigrant detainees in Georgia, with most of that money going to for-profit corporations that operate our immigration detention facilities. But when it comes to the actual needs of those immigrants, we won't spend even the cost of a plane ticket. Trying to fight back against the oppressive forces of authoritarian white supremacy and for-profit incarceration has sometimes felt impossible. What has kept me going is remembering that I am not alone in this work, that none of us are alone in this work. The violent forces of authoritarian white supremacy want us to think that we are alone and we have to win this fight by ourselves, but we are stronger together. Let me tell you about some of the alliances that give me hope. There are now hundreds of young adults in Georgia who have DACA or who are undocumented and who have trained at Freedom University on how to be human rights leaders. They use a civil rights and human rights framework to advocate for themselves in courageous and imaginative ways. The board chair of Freedom U is Charles Black, one of the leaders of the Atlanta student movement and a disciple of Martin Luther King. Together, he and the students are running an updated version of the Civil Rights era playbook, drawing national attention to the harmful segregationist policies of Deep South states. We are joined in this work by other UU leaders as well. When folks ask who is the living UU I am most proud of these days, I say Scott Warren. Scott Warren is a volunteer with No More Deaths. Warren was found last November to be not guilty on felony harboring charges for providing food, water, and orientation to 2 men lost in the desert while crossing the U.S.-Mexico border. No More Deaths is a ministry of the Tucson UU Church, and Warren is a UU himself. In fact, his legal defense rested on the concept that providing water was protected by religious freedom, and that his UU principles were legitimate grounds for undertaking these humanitarian acts. Warren was willing to risk jail time and a criminal record in the name of helping those most vulnerable, and he did so as a part of a ministry of his UU congregation. Y'all, Unitarian Universalism is a proud and demanding faith tradition. We are the ones who not only advocated radical abolitionism, but sheltered black folks who were hunted during the era of the fugitive slave law. We are the ones who advocated for pacifism during World War I and World War II, and who published the Pentagon Papers during the Vietnam War. We're the small but mighty denomination that gave 3 martyrs to the civil rights movement here in the Deep South. Atlanta UUs from this very congregation are the ones who made a human chain around our church in 1960 when the Unitarian Youth Group and the Ebenezer Baptist Youth Group met together and were threatened with racist violence. We are the folks who not only made our congregations welcoming and affirming places for LGBTQ plus people, but who won the court case for marriage equality in Massachusetts, the first state in the U.S. to allow gay marriage. Over the course of centuries, we have shown up to help the most vulnerable, those with the most need. And we have done so in solidarity, both alongside those with marginalized identities and behind them in support. Ours is a faith that respects the inherent worth and dignity of each human life, and we take that principle seriously. As UUs, we covenant to affirm and promote justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, and you can see that commitment is embedded in our DNA by how we show up for social justice. Multiple times just in the last year, I've seen folks' faces light up as they recall the help they got from UUs in organizing the Coalition of Immokalee Workers, the Brazilian Immigrant Center, and many other human rights campaigns. What this year of reaching out and getting proximate has taught me is that these sorts of campaigns are built more on relationships than they are on ideology. When folks are taking risks, and make no mistake, for many right now, there are only risky options, they are much more likely to rely on the help of people they know individually. In my efforts to be a reliable ally, I've gotten farther by simply showing up on a regular basis than by demonstrating that I believe the same methods and principles as the marginalized folks with whom I want to be in solidarity. As Professor Miguel de la Torre writes, if we are to live into the responsibility of restitution rather than the virtue of hospitality, we have to find ways to connect with those whom we owe restitution. Multiculturalism is hard, but it's the only honest way forward for those of us who recognize the need for such restitution. When Brian Stevenson advised us to get proximate, it was based on his experiences of getting to know death row inmates as a defense attorney. This is a time for us to get proximate to those who are suffering in Atlanta. This is a time to educate ourselves about the immigration system and continue to make our voices heard to our city councils, our state representatives and senators, our friends and family on social media. Aviva Chomsky's book, They Take Our Jobs and 20 Other Myths About Immigration, is great for learning about our current immigration system and how it came to be. And when our quarantines are over, I highly recommend attending immigration court in Atlanta and visiting immigrant detainees, because that is the kind of proximity and the kind of relationship building that will ensure that we are able to uphold our proud history of civil rights activism as UUs. As I mentioned in the offering, UUCA Social Justice Coordinator Beck Shalizi can help connect you with opportunities to get involved with the work right here in your congregation. We also need your help on the UU the Vote campaign. Building electoral power is a crucial aspect to making the changes in policies and practices that our state needs. I'm asking you to start right now, today or tomorrow, because this is highly relational work, and it takes months and years to build the trust necessary. Just like we as UUs are defined by our covenants and not by our creeds, this kind of social justice work is based on mutual trust and care, more so than shared ideology. This is how we heed Brian Stevenson's call to get proximate. I'm asking all of you to help immigrants in our community, not because many hands make light work, although that is true. I'm asking because my experiences have taught me that as hard as this work is, it is the best antidote to the helplessness and despair that many of us are feeling at this time. In the words of poet Rubem Alves, let us plant dates, even though those who plant them will never eat them. We must live by the love of what we will never see. This is the secret discipline. May it be so, and may we be the ones to make it so.